The Castle of Shadows. The rain had been falling since dawn. Thin, silvery sheets of it blurred the outlines of Ravenhall Castle, making the great fortress seem like a ghost emerging from mist. The towers loomed high and dark against a pale sky, their banners drooping, sodden by the endless drizzle. Somewhere within those stone walls lived the man whose name had haunted Elara Whitlow's every prayer and nightmare. Lord Alden Drake, the ruthless noble whose armies had crushed her father's rebellion 5 years ago. Elara stood at the gates with a small satchel clutched to her chest. Her boots were soaked through, her cloak heavy with rain. The guard at the gate, a large moustached man with the crest of the black dragon on his shoulder, eyed her with suspicion. "Name?" he barked. "Elara Whitlow," she replied, her voice low but steady. "I was sent from the village of Wintmere. The housekeeper requested new hands for the kitchens." The guard grunted, flipping through a parchment list. "Whitlow, eh? Any kin to that traitor from the Eastern Hills? The one who—" "No," Elara interrupted quickly, lowering her gaze. "No kin, sir." He shrugged and waved her in, indifferent. She exhaled quietly and stepped inside, past the gates of the family that had destroyed hers. The castle courtyard was alive with motion despite the dreary weather. Stable boys rushed to cover the horses, kitchen maids scurried with baskets of turnips and bread, and footmen carried fine cloaks from arriving carriages. The stone underfoot was slick with mud and rainwater, and the air carried the mingled scent of damp hay, iron, and roasting meat. Elara followed a narrow path toward the servants' wing, her heart pounding in rhythm with her footsteps. She had imagined this place countless times, the fortress where her father had fallen, the seat of House Drake's power. To enter it now, disguised as a mere maid, felt like stepping into the lion's mouth. But this was her plan, her purpose. She had come to learn, to watch, and someday to avenge. Inside, warmth replaced the rain. The servants' hall was a cramped but bustling world of its own. Laughter, clattering pots, the scent of stew. Mistress Hedda, the head housekeeper, stood in the centre like a general commanding troops. A broad-shouldered woman with sharp eyes. She took Elara's letter of service, read it, then studied her face with suspicion. "Too fine a face for scrubbing floors," Hedda muttered. "But we'll see if those hands know work. You'll take the east wing. The Lord's son returns tonight, the young master. Everything must be spotless." "The Lord's son?" Elara echoed, trying to sound casual. "Aye, Lord Sebastian Drake," Hedda said. "Been away fighting in the north these 3 years. Comes home a hero, they say. You'll not speak to him unless spoken to. And mind your eyes, the young master doesn't need another silly girl staring after him." Elara curtsied. "Yes, Mistress Hedda." But her mind was no longer in the hall. The name pulsed in her chest like a wound reopening. Sebastian Drake. The heir to the house that had spilled her father's blood. The one whose sword, or his father's, had ended everything she had once loved. By dusk, the castle transformed. Torches burned in golden rows, shadows flickered along the corridors, and the great hall gleamed with polished silver and banners of the black dragon sigil. Elara worked silently among the maids carrying trays, lighting candles, sweeping marble floors. Yet every clang of the great clock seemed to tighten her nerves. He would arrive tonight, the son of her enemy, the man she had sworn to despise before even laying eyes upon him. The gates thundered open at last. Through the curtain of rain, a procession of riders entered, cloaked and armoured, their horses steaming. At their head rode a man whose presence drew every gaze. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair damp and unruly, his cloak of black velvet trimmed in silver. He dismounted with the ease of a soldier and handed his reins to a stable boy. When he removed his gloves, Elara saw his hands, calloused, scarred, a warrior's hands. He looked up, and for an instant their eyes met across the courtyard. It lasted no longer than a breath, yet it burned. His gaze was piercing, storm-grey, the kind that saw too much. And Elara, though she immediately looked away, felt her knees weaken. This is him, the enemy's son, the man who bears the name I hate most in this world. Later that night, as the household feasted in the great hall, Elara moved silently through the corridors, lighting candles and ensuring rooms were set to order. The laughter and clinking of goblets drifted faintly from below, echoes of a world she could never belong to. In the corridor near the library, she paused. The door stood half open, lamplight spilling across the floor. Inside, a man stood by the window, removing his sword belt. His reflection caught in the glass. The same dark hair, the same steady composure. Sebastian Drake, alone. Elara froze. Her candle flickered. He turned slightly, noticing her shadow. "Who's there?" She lowered her head quickly. "Forgive me, my lord. I was told to prepare the hearth." His voice was deep, commanding yet calm. "You're new." "Yes, my lord. Just arrived this morning." He studied her, the firelight flickering over his face, strong features softened by fatigue. "What's your name?" "Elara, my lord. Elara," he repeated quietly, as if testing the sound. Then, with a faint nod, "Very well. Carry on." She moved past him to the hearth, her hands trembling slightly as she set kindling to flame. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken awareness. The air carried the faint scent of pine and smoke, and something deeper, more dangerous. When she finally rose, their eyes met, again. For a moment, she forgot her purpose, her vow, everything except the pull between them. Then she quickly curtsied and fled the room before her heart could betray her. Behind her, Sebastian watched the door close. Something in that maid's face, the sorrow in her eyes, the grace in her movements, stirred a feeling he hadn't known since before the wars. He didn't know her name would one day change his life. He only knew that for the first time since returning from battle, the shadows of Ravenhall felt a little less cold. The masked ball and the unseen gaze. By morning, the courtyard bustled with the energy of festivity. Musicians arrived from neighbouring towns, their carts filled with viols and harps. Carpenters hung garlands of crimson silk from the archways, and cooks laboured over stews, pastries, and roasted meats. The scent of cinnamon and honey filled the cold October air. Tonight would be the first grand feast in years, a masked ball to honour Lord Sebastian Drake's return from the northern campaigns. Nobles from all corners of the realm would attend, and the castle, so long shrouded in gloom, would glow again under candlelight and music. For most of the servants it was a night of exhaustion and excitement. For Elara Whitlow it was something else entirely, a night of danger. A night when she would walk among those who had destroyed her family's name. All morning she scrubbed the marble floors until they gleamed, her reflection wavering in the white stone. Around her, other maids whispered in clusters, of how handsome the young lord had become, of the jewels he'd won, the gifts he'd brought home from war. Elara worked silently, ignoring them. She had seen him. That was enough, and yet, in the quiet moments between tasks, his image returned to her unbidden. The grey eyes, the faint scar along his jaw, the calm authority in his voice. The way he had looked at her, not as a lord might look at a servant, but as a man surprised by something he couldn't name. She hated that her heart remembered. In the servants' quarters, Mistress Hedda distributed the extra duties for the evening. "The masked guests will fill the west wing," she barked. "You'll move quickly and unseen. Elara, you're assigned to the banquet hall. Keep the goblets full and the floor clean, and don't trip over your own feet this time." "Yes, mistress," Elara murmured. "And mind this," Hedda added with a warning glance. "There'll be lords and ladies aplenty tonight. Masks or not, you'll know your place." Elara nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. For the first time since her arrival, she would be among the very people who had dined and laughed while her father's house burned. If only they knew the truth of the maid who served their wine tonight. The sun sank behind the hills, leaving a lavender dusk. By nightfall, Ravenhall Castle had transformed. The great hall glittered with candlelight reflected off, crystal chandeliers. The air was heavy with perfume, wine, and the sound of violins. Nobles in brocade masks and feathered gowns spun in graceful circles beneath the vaulted ceiling. Elara moved among them. Unnoticed, a shadow in plain sight. Her simple servant's mask of white lace concealed her features just enough that none looked twice. She poured wine, fetched trays, and slipped between laughter and gossip like a ghost. "Lord Sebastian," someone called, "a toast to the hero of the North." Elara froze mid-step, her heart thudding. He was there, at the head of the hall, dressed in black velvet with a silver half-mask that only made his eyes more striking. He accepted the goblet raised to him, smiling faintly as the crowd cheered his name. When he lifted his mask briefly to drink, the torchlight caught the scar on his temple, a mark of battle, of victories won and blood spilled. She wondered how many men had fallen to that sword. She wondered if he remembered her father's name. Hours passed. Music rose and fell. Laughter echoed. And still her gaze found him again and again, across the tables, across the crowd. At times she thought she caught him looking back, his eyes lingering too long on the quiet maid in white lace. During a lull between courses, she stepped out to the terrace to breathe. The cool night air washed over her, carrying the scent of roses and rain. Beyond the balustrade, the garden stretched out in shadow and moonlight. She removed her mask slightly, rubbing at the ache on her temples. She didn't hear the footsteps until the door opened behind her. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere but here," said a low voice. Elara turned sharply. Sebastian stood in the doorway, mask still on, but there was no mistaking his presence. She bowed her head immediately. "Forgive me, my lord. I shouldn't be out here." "You're not in the way," he said gently. "Besides, the air is better out here than in that hall of painted faces." She said nothing. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the whisper of wind and the distant laughter inside. After a moment, he spoke again. "You're the new maid, aren't you? Elara?" Her breath caught. He remembered. "Yes, my lord." "You move quietly," he said, stepping closer. "Most servants chatter endlessly, but you seem apart from them, as if this place doesn't belong to you." She dared to meet his gaze then. "Perhaps it doesn't." Something flickered in his eyes. Curiosity, perhaps even recognition of some pain he couldn't name. "You speak boldly for a maid." "Only because I mean no offense," she murmured. "Sometimes silence is heavier than words." He smiled faintly. "Then perhaps we share that burden." For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The moonlight silvered his hair. The shadows softened the angles of his face. She could smell the faint scent of leather and cedar from his cloak. Every instinct screamed at her to turn away, but she couldn't. "What is it you fear, Elara?" he asked softly. She hesitated, searching for words that would not betray her heart. "Only that some truths are better left hidden, my lord." He looked at her for a long time. "You speak like someone who's lost much." Her throat tightened. "We all lose something in war, my lord." A silence fell between them, deep, aching. Then, from within the hall, the music changed to a slower melody. A waltz. Someone called for the young lord to dance. Sebastian straightened, but his eyes remained on her. "One day, perhaps, when you are not bound by this livery, you'll dance freely beneath this moon. Until then, remember, shadows do not last forever." And with that, he turned and walked back inside. Elara stood frozen where he left her, her heart pounding so fiercely she feared it might betray her. "He does not know who I am," she told herself. "He cannot know." And yet, every word he had spoken pierced her more deeply than any blade. Later, when the ball ended and the guests had drifted away, Elara remained behind to clean the hall. The candles burned low, the air thick with the scent of extinguished wax. She gathered empty goblets and wilted flowers, her steps echoing softly. At the far end of the room, something glinted on the floor, a silver mask. She picked it up. The inside was warm, as if it had just been worn. For a long moment, she held it in her hands, feeling the faint trace of his touch. Then, slowly, she pressed it to her chest, as if to still the chaos within. She told herself it meant nothing. A passing glance, a conversation by moonlight. But as she returned to her small candlelit room that night, she knew something irreversible had begun. She was the daughter of his enemy. He was the heir of the man she swore to destroy. And yet, in the quiet of her heart, a seed had been planted, one that would one day grow into ruin or salvation. Secrets beneath the moonlight. Every time Elara crossed the echoing halls of Ravenhall, she could still feel the brush of his gaze, that quiet, unreadable look that had passed between them on the terrace. It lingered like the ghost of music long after the violins had ceased. She tried to bury it beneath her duties. She polished silver until her hands blistered, scrubbed the grand stairway till the stone gleamed, and kept her head low. But the heart, once stirred, does not obey reason. Sebastian Drake had spoken to her only once since that night. A simple greeting in the corridor, his tone polite yet distant. Still, every word carried a strange gentleness that unsettled her. And behind that gentleness, Elara sensed something else. A shadow. A sorrow, not unlike her own. The castle in autumn was a place of quiet beauty and ancient melancholy. Crimson vines crept along the grey walls, and the courtyard trees shed golden leaves that swirled in the wind like dying embers. From her narrow window in the servants' quarters, Elara could see the distant moors where her father's banners had once flown. She often found herself staring at that horizon, whispering the same vow she had made as a child. "One day, I will make them answer for what they did to you, father." But vengeance was a cold thing, and the warmth of a gaze, one she should despise, had begun to thaw what she had thought forever frozen. One evening, she was sent to deliver fresh candles to the library. The great hall was deserted, the long corridors filled only with the flicker of torches and the soft echo of her footsteps. The library of Ravenhall was vast, a cathedral of books, with shelves that stretched toward arched ceilings and the scent of parchment and oak. As she entered, she froze. Sebastian was there. He stood by the window again, the same as he had that first night. Though this time there was no armor, no mask, only the quiet presence of a man deep in thought. Moonlight poured through the tall glass panes, silvering the edges of his dark hair. On the table beside him lay a half-open letter and a small wooden box. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. "Elara!" She lowered her head immediately. "Forgive me, my lord. I didn't know anyone was here." He smiled faintly. "You seem always to appear when I least expect it." "I can come back." "No," he said quickly, then softened his tone. "Stay. I could use a moment of company that isn't laced with politics and false smiles." Elara hesitated, uncertain. Servants did not linger in conversation with their masters, especially not with him. Yet there was something in his eyes that disarmed her, something that reminded her of the boy he must once have been before the wars and titles hardened him. She placed the candles down and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Tell me," he said quietly, "do you ever think about what lies beyond these walls?" She turned, startled by the question. "Beyond the castle, my lord?" "Yes. The world outside our pride and bloodlines. What do you dream of, Elara?" She faltered. "Dreams are a luxury, my lord. I think only of work." "I don't believe that," he said, studying her face. "Your eyes? They carry too many storms to belong to someone content with servitude." Her heart beat painfully in her chest. "Perhaps we all have storms we must hide." He smiled sadly. "Then we are alike." She dared to glance at the table, at the wooden box he had been holding earlier. "What is that, my lord, if I may ask?" He paused before answering. "A relic of my father's last campaign. Inside is a medal he awarded himself for the victory over Whitlow's rebellion." The name struck her like a blade. She froze, her breath catching. Sebastian didn't notice her reaction. He lifted the box lid and gazed at the small silver medal inside, engraved with the Drake's sigil. "It was meant to symbolize triumph," he said softly, "but every time I look at it, I wonder what price was paid for that triumph. How many homes burned? How many sons never came home?" Elara's throat constricted. You think of those things?" "Every day," he said simply. "War teaches us how to win, but not how to live with victory." His honesty shook her. This was not the cruel son of a tyrant she had imagined all her life. This was a man burdened by his father's sins, perhaps even haunted by them. "Did you know him?" Sebastian asked suddenly. Her blood went cold. "Who, my lord?" "Whitlow, the rebel lord my father defeated." Elara forced herself to breathe evenly. "I've only heard the name, my lord." He nodded slowly, still gazing out the window. "My father called him a traitor. But I've read his letters, the ones confiscated after the rebellion. He spoke not of conquest, but of fairness, of ending the taxes that broke the farmers, of freeing the lands my father claimed by force. Perhaps he wasn't the villain history made him." Her heart raced. He doesn't know who I am." And yet, hearing her father's name from his lips, not in hatred, but in understanding, filled her eyes with tears she dared not shed. In the days that followed, their paths crossed more often. Once in the gardens, when she was gathering herbs for the kitchen and found him sketching beneath the oak tree. Once in the stables, when his horse startled and she calmed it with a gentle hand. Each meeting was brief, accidental, and yet heavy with something unsaid. He began to linger when she was near, asking simple questions, where she came from, what she thought of the castle, whether she missed her home. She answered cautiously, her words chosen like steps across ice. And though she told him little, he listened as though every syllable mattered. She noticed the small things, how he flinched at loud noises, how he watched the horizon with a soldier's unease, how his hands sometimes trembled when he thought no one saw. There was a wound in him, invisible but deep, and against her will, compassion began to war with hatred inside her. One night, unable to sleep, Ilara wandered to the gardens. The moon hung full above the world, spilling pale light across the hedges and fountains. The castle was silent, the torches long extinguished. She found him there, as if drawn by the same restlessness. "Do you ever find peace, my lord?" she asked softly from the shadows. He turned, startled, then smiled faintly. "Not often, but perhaps you might teach me how." She stepped closer, the silver light catching her face. "Peace is not something I've known either." "Then we are cursed alike," he said. They stood in silence, the night air cool between them. Then, without thinking, she asked, "Why do you stay here? Why serve a legacy built on blood?" His expression darkened. "Because leaving would mean abandoning those who still depend on me. My father's rule broke many, and if I can rebuild what he destroyed, perhaps that will be redemption enough." Her voice trembled. "Redemption cannot bring back the dead." "No," he said softly, "but it can keep the living from dying the same way." Their eyes met then, and the distance between them seemed to vanish. She saw in him not the enemy, but a man trying desperately to mend what had been shattered, and he, in her, saw not a servant, but a soul who understood his torment. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then she turned away abruptly. "Good night, my lord." "Ilara!" But she was already walking back toward the castle, her pulse wild with confusion. She could not afford this. She could not let his kindness weaken her purpose. And yet, even as she lay awake that night, her tears slipped silently across her pillow. For the first time, not out of hatred, but out of something far more dangerous. Whispers of war and heartbeats. The mornings turned grey and brittle, and frost crept over the castle windows like veins of glass. The forest beyond the moors was quiet, the rivers frozen. Smoke curled lazily from the chimneys, a thin reminder that warmth still clung to life somewhere within those walls. And yet, despite the chill, whispers ran through the castle like wildfire, whispers of unrest. The northern lords had begun to stir again. Rumours of rebellion reached even the kitchens, carried by merchants and travellers, that men loyal to the fallen House Whitlow were gathering in secret. That they sought justice for the massacre of 5 winters past. Ilara listened in silence whenever such words were spoken, her hands busy, her expression unreadable. Inside, her heart raced. Her father's name had not been forgotten. Perhaps his dream still breathed, even if only in embers. Meanwhile, Sebastian Drake moved through the castle like a man haunted by too many ghosts. Letters from the royal court arrived almost daily, summoning him to address the rising threats. His father, Lord Alden, grew restless, his health failing, his temper sharper than ever. "Let them come," the old lord thundered one evening in the great hall. "We crushed Whitlow once, we shall crush his shadows again. The Drakes do not bow to ghosts." Sebastian said nothing. He merely watched the fire, its light flickering over his features, jaw tight, eyes distant. Ilara, serving quietly nearby, caught the fleeting look of pain that crossed his face. When their gazes met for an instant, something unspoken passed between them. A shared dread of what another war would bring. Days later, Ilara was called to bring a message to the armory. She found Sebastian there alone, standing beside a table strewn with maps. His cloak lay discarded, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing the scars that lined his forearms, white against the tan of his skin, the history of battles carved into flesh. He looked up as she entered. "Elara," he said, voice low. "Come in." She hesitated, glancing at the parchment spread before him. The inked lines marked villages, her villages, the hills of Whitlow, the river Wintmere, the valley where her father's house had once stood. He noticed her gaze and sighed. "You know these lands?" "I grew up near them," she said carefully. "Then you know they will suffer again if war breaks." His hand clenched. "The rebellion, if it rises, will only lead to more death." Her voice trembled. "And yet, can you blame those who rise? They have nothing left but the ashes of their dead." His eyes lifted to hers, sharp, pained. "You speak as though you're one of them," she faltered. "I speak as one who has known loss." He took a step closer, his voice softening. "Tell me, Elara, what loss is it you bear?" She shook her head quickly. "It does not matter, my lord. It matters to me." The words escaped him before he could stop them. He stared at her, as if realizing only then how deeply he meant it. Elara's throat tightened. "You shouldn't care for the grief of a servant." "Then perhaps I'm tired of being the kind of man who doesn't," he replied. Silence stretched between them, thick as fog. Then, softly, she said, "War isn't only fought with swords, my lord. Sometimes it's fought with truth." He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time, not as a maid, but as someone far beyond her station. "You speak like someone born for more than this life." Her lips curved in a faint, bitter smile. "Perhaps once, long ago, I was." That night, snow began to fall, soft, endless flakes that blanketed the world in silence. The castle, buried in white, looked less like a fortress and more like a tomb. Elara stood by her narrow window, her breath misting the cold glass. Below, the courtyard glowed in moonlight. She saw Sebastian crossing it, his cloak drawn close against the storm, heading toward the chapel, a place he often visited when the weight of duty grew heavy. Without knowing why, she followed. The chapel was small, tucked behind the east wing. Its air was cold, thick with candle smoke and the faint scent of pine resin. Stained glass windows cast dim pools of coloured light across the stone floor. Sebastian knelt before the altar, head bowed. She watched from the shadows, heart aching at the sight. This was not the proud air of the Drakes, not the warrior sung about in the taverns. This was a man worn down by guilt. When he rose and turned, he started slightly at the sight of her. "Elara, I didn't mean to intrude," she said softly. "I saw you come here." He studied her for a moment, then exhaled. "No one else comes here anymore. My father thinks prayer is for the weak. Perhaps he's right." She stepped closer. "Perhaps it takes more strength to kneel than to command." A small, wistful smile touched his lips. "And what do you pray for, Elara?" Her answer came without thought. "For forgiveness. For something I cannot undo." He nodded slowly. "Then our prayers are not so different." They stood facing each other, only a few feet apart. The candles flickered between them, the flames swaying like uncertain hearts. "Sebastian," she whispered, daring to speak his name for the first time. The sound of it on her tongue felt both forbidden and freeing. He froze, his eyes locking on hers. "Say it again. Sebastian." He stepped closer, the distance vanishing. "If you knew what that does to me," her breath trembled, "then we both should be afraid." "I already am." The world seemed to hold its breath. The snow outside pressed against the glass. The wind moaned through the eaves. He reached out, fingers barely grazing her cheek. For one wild heartbeat, she let herself forget everything. Her vow, her name, her past. There was only him, and the warmth of his hand against her skin. Then footsteps echoed in the corridor. They broke apart instantly. Sebastian turned away, his voice low and strained. "You should go." She hesitated, then whispered, "And you, my lord, should remember who you are." He closed his eyes, as if her words cut deeper than she knew. "That's what I'm most afraid of, Elara. Remembering." She left him standing alone among the candles, his shadow long and broken against the chapel wall. In the days that followed, they avoided each other, though both felt the absence keenly. Duty and pride held them apart, but longing tethered them in silence. And while love took root in forbidden soil, the outside world darkened. Scouts brought word of armed camps forming in the east. Letters arrived sealed in crimson wax. Lord Alden's fury grew, and the drums of war began to whisper once more. Soon, neither heart nor kingdom would remain untouched. Betrayal in the Garden of Thorns. The snow melted slowly, leaving the land drenched and grey. Winter's hush gave way to the restless murmur of spring, but peace did not follow with the thaw. The banners of rebellion had risen once more. Whispers had become warnings, and warnings had turned into reports. Men bearing the Whitlow sigil, the Silver Stag, had gathered in the eastern woods, calling themselves the Sons of the Fallen. Villages loyal to House Drake began to vanish under the cover of night. Smoke curled from the horizon, faint and distant, but visible, even from Ravenhall's high towers. Lord Alden Drake raged like a storm unleashed. "They crawl out of their graves," he spat. "If they wish to meet the fate of their fathers, then let them come." Sebastian said little. He stood beside his father in the council hall, silent as the fire roared. His jaw was tense, his eyes shadowed. He could no longer tell which side of this old war was righteous, or whether righteousness even existed in such a legacy of blood. Meanwhile, Elara lived each day with dread coiled around her heart. The rebellion she had once whispered prayers for had become real. Her father's old allies had returned, but not as heroes, as ghosts bent on revenge. She should have felt triumph, but all she felt was fear. Fear for what it would mean for the man she loved. And love him she did, though she fought it in vain. Every night she replayed the moment in the chapel, his voice, his touch, his trembling breath. And every morning she rose telling herself that it could not be, that their bond was a sin against both their bloodlines. But the heart is deaf to reason, and fate, it seemed, was cruelly amused. It was on a morning heavy with fog that everything began to unravel. Mist clung to the castle gardens, wrapping the rose bushes in veils of white. Elara had gone there early, tasked with trimming the withered stems. The thorns pricked her fingers, beads of blood forming on her skin, but she didn't flinch. Pain was familiar. It kept her grounded. A voice broke the quiet. "Still tending the dead, Elara?" She turned and froze. A man stood at the edge of the path, cloaked in brown, mud spattered on his boots. His face was lean, sharp-eyed, with a scar running from temple to jaw. He was no servant. "Who are you?" she whispered. The man smiled grimly. "A friend to those your masters would see forgotten. Don't tell me you've forgotten your friends, Lady Elara Whitlow." Her blood turned to ice. "Don't!" she hissed, glancing around. "Don't call me that here." "Why not?" he said, stepping closer. "You think hiding in this den of wolves will change what you are? The daughter of Lord Rowan Whitlow. the rightful heir to the lands they stole and the blood they spilled. Ilara's throat tightened. You don't understand. You must leave. If they find you, they'll hang me, he said coolly, as they hanged your father's men. But I came for you, my lady. We're gathering again, the sons of the fallen. The people still speak your name. They need their symbol, their heart. I am no leader, she said fiercely, and I want no more blood spilled in my father's name. He stared at her, disbelief darkening his eyes. You live under the same roof as the man who murdered him, and you speak of peace? She flinched as if struck. You don't understand what this place has become, what he has become. He looked at her sharply. He? You mean Sebastian Drake? He laughed bitterly. Tell me it isn't true. Tell me you haven't fallen for the Viper's son. Ilara looked away, tears stinging her eyes. Leave, please, before someone sees you. He shook his head. You can't bury who you are forever, Ilara. The truth will find you, whether you want it to or not. He disappeared into the fog, leaving her trembling amid the roses, her hands bleeding from thorns she hadn't felt pierce her skin. Just the night, the truth did find her. Lord Alden's steward came pounding at her chamber door after sunset, his voice sharp. The Lord summons you to the council chamber. Her heart stuttered. She followed in silence through cold, torchlit halls until the heavy oak doors opened before her. Inside, Lord Alden sat like a carved idol behind his desk, eyes cold as winter steel. Sebastian stood beside him, pale and rigid. Do you know this man? Lord Alden growled, tossing a bloodied parchment onto the table. It was a letter, the ink smeared but readable, her father's name scrawled at the bottom. Ilara's knees went weak. The steward stepped forward. My lord? She was seen speaking with him in the gardens, the rebel courier who escaped the patrol at Wintmer. Sebastian's gaze snapped to her. Ilara, is this true? She couldn't speak. Lord Alden rose slowly. Whitlow. He spat the name like poison. I knew that face, the same cursed eyes. You thought you could deceive me? A traitor's whelp, hiding under my roof? Ilara fell to her knees. My lord, please, silence, he roared. Your father's blood runs foul in your veins. You came here to spy, to poison my house. Sebastian stepped forward, his voice shaking. Father, wait! But Alden was already reaching for his sword. The sins of the father fall to the child. I'll see the line of Whitlow ended tonight. Ilara's breath caught. For a moment, she saw death in the old lord's eyes, cold, righteous, unrelenting. Then Sebastian moved between them. No! Out of my way, boy! Alden snarled. Sebastian's hand shot out, gripping the hilt of his father's blade. No more blood, father, not hers. A silence so sharp it hurt filled the chamber. Alden stared at him, disbelief turning to rage. You would defy me, for her? Sebastian's voice broke. I don't expect you to understand. Ilara whispered, Sebastian, don't! But he turned to her, his eyes full of anguish. You should have told me, Ilara. Gods, you should have told me who you were. I wanted to, she said, tears spilling freely now. I tried, but every word felt like betrayal. You were my enemy, Sebastian, and yet you became my heart. He flinched as if the words wounded him. And you became my ruin. Alden's roar shattered the moment. Guards, seize her! Ilara gasped as rough hands grabbed her arms. Sebastian lunged forward, but two soldiers held him back. Father, please! She'll hang by dawn, Alden declared coldly. Let her father's ghost watch as his bloodline dies. No! Sebastian's voice cracked through the hall like thunder. But the guards dragged her away, her sobs echoing through the corridors. leaving him on his knees as his father's wrath burned above him. That night, Sebastian sat in the dark, his hands shaking, her name a silent plea on his lips. He had fought wars, faced death, carried the weight of command, but nothing had ever broken him like this. He loved her, and now loving her meant betraying his blood, his name, and the very ground he stood on. Outside, the wind howled against the battlements, carrying with it the scent of roses and the memory of her voice. Flames of the past snowmelt dripped from the eaves, and the air was thick with smoke and fear. The dungeon beneath the castle reeked of damp stone and iron, and in its coldest cell knelt Elara Whitlow, her wrists bound, her heart hollow. They had torn away her name, her purpose, her disguise, and now all that remained was truth. A truth that could kill her before dawn. Above, thunder rolled over the moors. But it wasn't thunder, it was the sound of distant drums. The rebellion had come. Sebastian stood in his chambers, hands braced against the window frame as the first fires lit the horizon. Villages burned in the distance. The rebellion had struck sooner than any scout predicted. He turned as the door burst open. "Lord Drake!" a soldier cried. "The Whitlow banners approach from the east. They're already crossing the Wintmere Bridge." Sebastian's blood went cold. "How many?" "Too many, my lord. 2,000 at least." He strode past the man, fastening his sword belt. "Where is my father?" "In the war room, preparing the defences. I'll join him," Sebastian said, his voice hard, but even as he spoke, his thoughts burned elsewhere. In the dungeon, in the dark, with her. In the depths of the keep, Elara sat shivering, listening to the chaos above. Shouts echoed faintly through the stone. Orders, weapons clanging, the rising cry of alarm. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer she barely believed in anymore. Footsteps approached. She braced herself. But when the cell door opened, it wasn't a guard. It was Sebastian. He looked wild, armor half-clad, cloak torn, hair damp with sweat and rain. His eyes burned with urgency. "Get up," he said, voice raw. She stared at him. "Why are you here?" "Because I won't let my father kill you." "You'll lose everything," she whispered. "Your title, your name." He knelt, cutting her bonds with his dagger, then let them have it all. "Sebastian, no!" He caught her face in his hands. "You are not my enemy. Whatever our fathers did, it ends here, with us." Her breath trembled. "If we run, they'll call you traitor. They already do." The chains clattered to the ground. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other. Two souls on opposite sides of a burning world. Then he pulled her to her feet. "Come, before they see us." They slipped through the servants' tunnels beneath the keep. The passages were narrow, lined with dripping stone and old torches that hissed in the draught. Elara's fingers brushed the rough walls as they ran, her heart hammering. When they emerged into the lower courtyard, chaos reigned. Soldiers shouted orders, horses reared, and the air stank of smoke. From the towers, the crimson banners of House Drake flapped violently, a house under siege. Sebastian led her toward the stables, but before they could mount, a shout pierced the din. "Sebastian!" Lord Alden stood on the battlements, sword drawn, his face twisted with fury. "I should have known," he roared. "You betray your own blood for hers." Sebastian turned, his voice carrying over the storm. "I'm saving us from your hatred. Hatred built this house," Alden thundered. "Without it, we are nothing." He raised his sword, pointing it down toward them. "If you leave with her, you are no son of mine." Sebastian met his father's gaze. The man who had raised him, taught him, scarred him, and felt nothing but sorrow. Then I will go as my own man. He took Ilara's hand, and they ran. The castle gates loomed ahead, half broken by the assault. Smoke and fire blurred the air. Archers shouted from the walls. Rebels clashed with Drake's soldiers in the outer courtyard, the two banners of blood and stag colliding in a storm of death. "Ilara!" someone shouted amid the chaos. She turned and froze. The man from the garden, the scarred messenger, stood among the rebels, sword raised. "You're alive! We thought they'd killed you." "Leave her," Sebastian warned, drawing his blade. The man's eyes narrowed. "You fight for her, but you wear your father's steel. You'll die like him." He lunged. Steel met steel. The courtyard erupted around them. The clang of swords, the screams, the smell of ash. Sebastian fought fiercely, every strike born of desperation. But the messenger was fast, too fast. His blade sliced Sebastian's arm, sending sparks flying. "Stop!" Ilara cried, stepping forward. "Please, he's not your enemy." The man hesitated for an instant, and that was enough. Sebastian's sword came up, striking the hilt from his hand. The blade clattered across the cobbles. The rebel stumbled back, glaring. "You think this ends because you love her? Blood like yours poisons everything it touches." He turned to Ilara. "You were meant to lead us, not die for him." "I never wanted to lead anyone," she cried. "Not into hate, not into another war." Her words hung in the air, trembling and fierce. Even the noise of battle seemed to dull around her. Sebastian took her hand again. "We're leaving, now!" Together they mounted a waiting horse and rode through the shattered gates, into the storm, into the unknown. Behind them, the castle burned. Lord Alden stood upon the walls, watching his legacy crumble, the banners of Whitlow and Drake both torn apart by fire and rage. He whispered into the smoke, his voice hollow. "Let them run. The world will find them soon enough." They rode until the moon was high, and the fires of Ravenhall were only a distant glow. The forest swallowed them, shadows deep and silent. At last, exhausted, they stopped by an old hunter's cabin. The roof sagged, moss covering its stones, but it offered shelter. Inside, Sebastian bound his wounded arm, while Ilara tended the fire, her fingers trembling. Neither spoke for a long time. Then she whispered, "You shouldn't have come for me." He looked up at her, pale in the firelight, her eyes glistening. "I couldn't have done anything else." Tears welled in her eyes. "You've lost everything." He smiled faintly. "Not everything. You're still here." She pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle the sob. When he reached for her, she didn't pull away. Their lips met, slow, desperate, and full of everything they'd fought against. It wasn't gentle, it was survival. When they broke apart, he whispered against her skin, "If the world hunts us, then let it. I'd rather be damned with you than live as my father's heir." She closed her eyes, resting her forehead against his. "Then we are damned together." Outside, the wind howled through the trees, a requiem for the house that had fallen, and the love that had risen from its ashes. The oath beneath the ruin's ashes floated over the land where two houses had burned each other to ruin. The banners of Drake and Whitlow lay together in the mud, torn and indistinguishable, red and silver, stained into one shade of sorrow. Ravens picked at what was left of men who had once called each other brothers. The rebellion had won no victory. Neither had the Drakes. Only the earth had triumphed, swallowing the dead in silence. And through that silence rode Sebastian Drake, wounded and weary, his cloak blackened by soot, his arm bound in blood-stained linen. Before him, across the scarred valley, the once mighty Ravenhall stood broken, towers split, gates shattered, its proud heart turned to rubble. He had come back for her. Because love does not vanish when hope dies, it becomes the only thing worth dying for. Inside the ruins of the keep, Elara lay half-conscious, trapped beneath fallen beams and stone. Smoke still curled through the air, stinging her lungs. She had tried to flee when the last of the fire broke the roof apart, but the floor had given way beneath her. Her hands bled where she had clawed at the debris, whispering his name through cracked lips. "Sebastian, please!" Each breath was pain. Yet through the ringing in her ears, she heard something. A voice, distant but real. "Elara!" Her heart lurched. "Sebastian!" She tried to move again, but the beam above her leg was too heavy. Tears streaked her soot-stained face. Just as despair took hold, hands, strong, desperate, gripped the beam and heaved. With a groan of splintered wood, it lifted enough for her to crawl free. Sebastian dropped to his knees beside her, gathering her into his arms. "Gods, Elara! I thought—" She clutched at his tunic, shaken. "You came back. I'll always come back." He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath ragged with relief and exhaustion. Around them, the castle groaned under its own ruin, a hollow echo of what once was. "You're hurt," she whispered. "So are you," he said softly. "Seems we're both too stubborn to die." She gave a faint, broken laugh that turned into a sob. "It's over, isn't it?" He looked around, at the bodies, the smoke, the ruined banners. "Yes, for everyone but us." They made their way through the wreckage to the old chapel, the one where their hearts had first trembled toward each other. Its roof was gone, the stained glass shattered, but the altar still stood amid the ashes, bathed in pale, cold light. Elara paused before it, tears glinting in her eyes. "So much death," she whispered. "For what? Pride? Vengeance? Names carved into stone?" Sebastian's hand brushed hers. "No more names. No more vengeance." He turned to face her fully, his voice low and certain. "Let it end here, with us." She looked at him, confusion and love warring in her eyes. "End?" He took her hands in his. "Our fathers' war began because they believed blood was destiny. Let's prove them wrong. Swear to me, Elara. No matter what becomes of us, this hatred dies today." Her breath caught. "You'd give up your name?" "I already have. Sebastian Drake died the moment I chose you." She shook her head, tears falling freely now. "If we do this, we have nothing left." He smiled faintly. "Then nothing will be enough." For a long, trembling moment, they stood among the ruins, the sky grey and endless above them. Then, slowly, she knelt beside the altar and he knelt with her. Their fingers intertwined, blood and ash mingling where their hands met. "I, Elara Whitlow," she whispered, her voice soft but steady, "swear before what remains of heaven and earth, I will not seek vengeance. I will not carry hatred in my father's name." Sebastian's voice followed hers, low and solemn. "And I, Sebastian of no house, swear before the same. I will not live by the sins of my blood, nor by the chains of my past. I am free of my father's war." He took her trembling hand and pressed it to his lips. "From this day, our blood is our own. No banners, no names, only this." He placed her palm against his chest over his heart. "Only us." Elara closed her eyes. "Only us." For a time, the world was still. Outside, the morning wind swept through the ruins, scattering ash like snow. The light touched their faces, two souls who had defied centuries of hate, bound now not by birth or vengeance, but by choice. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quiet, almost fragile. "What will we do now?" He smiled faintly. "We rebuild. Not kingdoms, but peace." Her fingers brushed his cheek. "Together! Always, he leaned forward and kissed. Her, not with fire, but with peace. A kiss that sealed not victory, but surrender. The surrender of pride, of hatred, of everything that had chained them to the past. That night, the last flames of Ravenhall burned themselves out. By morning, the smoke was gone, and only the blackened stones remained. Travellers would speak, in years to come, of a wandering couple seen across the northern wilds, a man and woman who bore no sigil, who asked for no titles, who helped rebuild the villages torn by war. Some said the man had once been a lord. Some said the woman had once been a traitor. But those who saw them together spoke only of how they looked at each other, as though they carried a secret that no ruin could destroy. An oath made beneath the ashes. A love that had outlived hate.